What if it's like now a video game, but like you're inside of the video game? Then like, are you like, do you think that's like more athletic now because you now have like the mental and physical part of it?
Um, I think you still run into the similar dilemma that we had before, where the physical exertion is probably not going to be there. I
Uh
think
huh.
the physical exertion might come. The most physical it'll get will be, um, maybe cardiovascular, and like
Mm-hmm.
with your
Like your
breathing,
heart
like having
rate, yeah,
your
breathing
heart
and
rate,
heart
but
rate might go up.
like actual like your arms getting tired, your legs cramping, you're just exhausted, like you can't move, your legs don't want to move, your ankles hurt. I don't think you're gonna get that in esports ever,
But the thing
even if you
is,
VR.
like we've been like, there's like things to like show that like your mind can like affect the way how like your body feels, though, and like what
Yeah,
your
but
body reacts to.
yeah, but that's like a more of a mental thing than an actual physical thing. Like, yeah, you might
But if it
feel
hurts you physically,
tired.
then like, isn't it still real?
What? Okay, but how are you gonna get hurt in a video game? And
Yeah, like you're not gonna really get hurt like in the video game, but if your body processes it like you're hurt and like you react to like the pain like you're hurt, then like wasn't it still like, aren't you like hurt basically?
I mean, I guess
Like
I feel like it's more of a mental thing that you have to like understand when you're playing the game, because you like the reason why you feel pain is because your body's telling you, hey, there's something wrong.
mhm.
And if you that's something like you can mentally train to like understand, like, hey, this is a video game, none of this shit is actually happening, and you can get over that.
Mhm.
Whereas traditional sports, you feel pain, it's probably because you did something wrong or somebody hurt you.
Yeah, yeah. I just I feel like if like video games like did get to that point, like I don't think I could still consider them like athletes. Because it's like you said, it's like all mental still. It's, I don't know. It's like I would consider them. Uh, well, we talked about earlier. Athletes has to do more with like the mentality and the like mental like toughness and discipline. But
One of the, I mean, there's that, but like this is kind of like another thing I was kind of thinking about, when we also look about like the stigma between sports and like e-athletes, is a lot of like sports athletes, because they've been around for so long, have had the platform to grow and be like, have influential like roles in people's lives, be public speakers and things like be people that people actually look up to
mm-hmm.
and respect. And I feel like esports hasn't had that time to grow and given that platform to e-athletes to be somebody to look up to and respect and want to be like.
You think
At
so?
least I don't feel like it's been given enough time to produce enough people. I'm
But
sure there's people in the field that like that
okay.
people look up to and respect, but when you want to compare the number of people in esports versus regular sports, I don't feel like it's comparable because of the how long sports have been around compared to esports.
And also because of the nature of video games, like you said too. Like, because video games are gonna come and go. Like, people are gonna find different like streamers and like computers for like that video game and stuff that they're gonna like and follow at that time.
Yeah.
But like,
Oh,
I
and
feel
then
like the same thing. I feel like the same thing also happens for like regular sports though, because like you'll just like a certain football team and like a certain athlete for that time, but once they leave, you basically kind of just pick a new player for that team. So like, isn't that kind of the same thing as like people just kind of move on from like, you may not move on from like the same team, but like you kind of move on from like your favorite player to like one generation to the next.
kind of, but at the same time, it's like a lot of people still follow athletes after they retire. Whereas I
That's
feel
true.
like
Yeah, and I feel like people do that with e-athletes too.
not as much. Like maybe if the e-athlete goes into streaming.
I think most e-athletes stream, or yeah, esports people
Yeah,
stream. Yeah.
yeah, but how a lot of e-athletes, for the most part, after they retire and go to full-time streaming, they usually don't get as much viewership as they had when they were on a pro team, because the pro team does like marketing things and helps attract viewers for them. Whereas afterwards, unless they were like a legend in their sport or esport, or like really really good, they don't have to necessarily be a legend. Like the viewers are probably not going to keep up with them.
Yeah, I think the kind of the same thing goes with regular athletes though too though.
Not
like,
as
if
much.
You're, okay, bro. Like look at like Malcolm Butler from like the Patriots. Like that guy is a legend in Patriot lore, dude. Like a straight up legend. He saved the Patriots Super Bowl against the Seattle Seahawks by picking the ball on the 1 yard line when they decided to throw it instead of hand it off to Marshawn Lynch, right? He will live in Patriot legend and lore forever. But like after he like left the team, like he no longer like had like that like platform and like had like all that like praise and like success and like he didn't make like all pro like after that, you know what I mean? Like after he left the Patriots.
Yeah, sure. Okay, that's one guy, but like let's say like
it's
on
just
the
an
Patriots,
example of someone who could be considered a legend who still doesn't make it like afterwards.
Yeah,
I mean, like even in sports.
Again, nothing's absolute, but what I'm trying to say though with this is in traditional sports, on a sports team, like a football team, you can probably remember 3 or 4 people from that team. Mm-hmm. You know, I during that generation, for like everybody's gonna remember these 3 or 4 people, maybe more, maybe less.
Yeah.
In esports, you probably only will remember, at least from like league, like from each region, from the whole region. This is between like 10 plus teams, you know, 5, 6 people, and that's because they're like literally the best in their role. Unless you actually like are hardcore dedicated, like keeping up with the sport, esport, every single team who's playing every single game. Yeah, most people are not going to remember. If you're just a casual viewer, you're not going to know more than 5, 6 people from that region.
Yeah. Do you think like how long do you think it'll take then for like esports to like become as popular as like regular sports then?
Oof. I feel like it's not possible to really put a timeline on that because it really depends on when we'll get a game good enough
to last.
Yeah.
World of Warcraft, bro.
Yeah, who the hell's watching that right now comparatively?
Dude,
on the
25,000 people were watching the Arena World Cups today.
I mean, 168,000 people were watching the league and North American finals.
I mean, these weren't the finals. This was just a cup. Like, this is just like a like standard tournament like thing for like later qualifiers and shit, you know. So it's not a finals or anything, you know.
Okay, the regular viewership is 75,000 then for like a regular league match.
Still,
so it's like
like you're saying like you're acting like 25,000 isn't a lot of people, you know.
No, I know,
and this is so early in esports history still.
I know, but the thing is with what I'm trying to compare is like look how old WoW is and look how old League is, and League has more viewers than like WoW.
Yeah, but the thing is WoW didn't become a competitive esport really until much later, whereas League was built to be an esport. League was literally built with the intention of it being a sport and people competing for money. World of Warcraft was built off of the intention of it's an MMORPG and you fantasize and you go to Goldshire and you know, disgusting. Huh?
League didn't become an official esport until it's like 3rd or 4th season.
It was designed with the intention of that though. Like that's been like stated. Like it was designed to be a competitive game, like where you're like it's like teams going against each other is the thing. Like you know, like that's what like I'm saying is like an esport, like where it's a competition, you know, like where you're going against someone. Whereas WoW wasn't designed for that. Like it wasn't like it adapted to becoming that like much later because there became a market for it, you know.
Okay, but my point is WoW esports has been around for like what 16 years?
No, WoW esports. WoW esports. Fuck. I don't know. They
started doing like BlizzCon when WoW ever. Like,
BlizzCon and stuff has been around for a while. Yes, like I know at least 2008, so at least 13 years. But the thing is live streaming, like live streaming and all that hasn't been around like as long. And World of Warcraft hasn't gotten into like that competitive like pushing like their esports like agenda. You know what I mean? basically, bro, like, all I'm trying to say is that, like, 25,000 people is a lot for a game that doesn't give a fuck about their esports. And I'm saying that, like, I think that the time that regular sports and esports are actually going to be comparable in viewership and pay and all that is going to come sooner than you think it is. I think it could come. I think it could come within our lifetime. Honestly, I think by the time we hit our late 40s, we could see esports players being signed. Like, dude, Ninja signed a $100 million contract with Mixer, I believe. Okay, like he was making almost $10 million a year.
That's different. You can't compare a streamer,
bro.
You can't compare a streamer to esports athletes because streamers provide an entertainment service that can be profited off of by sponsors. No. Okay, this is different because this is an individual person.
In NFL and baseball contracts, they do all that shit too. Like the contracts they sign, they have sponsorship stuff that they have to fulfill and certain requirements and all that.
They're sponsored by a team. They're the like BMW.
What's the difference between being sponsored by a team and being sponsored by a corporation? They both still file like taxes and all that shit. Like a team is just the word they call themselves a team, but they are still a corporation. Typically, or a company.
Okay, but the thing is, generally, when you come to a sports league or an esports league, there will be different businesses sponsoring different teams. Whereas if you're being sponsored by Twitch, which is like a streaming service, all the sponsors from Twitch are essentially sponsoring that contract for Ninja, the $100 million. That's the difference. It's all the sponsorship is coming from the same place, whereas in other sports,
it's the same thing with regular sports though, dude. Like when you sign with a team, all advertising for that team is also advertising for you too, because you're in all of the ads. They put you in the ads, bro. Yeah. Okay,
how many ads have you seen the third string for Patriots?
Okay, yeah, no, not the third string because he doesn't fucking play and he's not the one who gets the $100 million contract like we're talking about. But when you have like JJ Watt was in like every Houston Texans commercial. Like,
yeah, out of how many people on a football team?
One person out of how many e-athletes? Like, bro, like I get like
I don't consider a streamer an e-athlete. I think they're completely different.
But Ninja was an e-athlete still. He competed in many Fortnite tournaments and like did really well in a lot of them and was considered one of the best in the world for a long time.
Yeah, and I don't consider streaming when you're getting sponsored by Mixer. I don't consider that like him being an e-athlete. If he was like on a team and he was getting like sponsorships from there, I feel like that's a very different comparison. Do you see what I'm saying? Like when you're actually competing, there's less incentive in esports to get sponsored versus when you're a large streamer.
What? Wait. When you're competing in esports, there's less incentive to get sponsors as opposed to when you're a large streamer?
Yeah.
No, when you're competing in viewership. No, when you're competing in esports, you have a bigger incentive to get sponsors because if you're not a streamer, then you don't have basically any income.
No. But this is the reason why you're more incentivized to sponsor streamers is because they have a consistent schedule where they show up however many days a week, all the time to X amount of viewers. Whereas, and it's obviously averaged out.
The thing is, dude.
But look at esports. Generally, they show up at the most 3 days a week, and most large streamers are at the 3 times a week. You might see Friday, Saturday, Sundays when you'll see like esports competitions. Whereas streamers, if they want, they can go 7 days a week. So why wouldn't you sponsor somebody that's going to show your ad 7 days a week versus 3 days a week?
But dog, the thing is most esports competitors are incentivized by their sponsors to become streamers because they'll make more money. Most esports players are streamers is the thing.
Depending on the pro scene.
Almost most of them, dude. There are very, very few pro players in any esports like genre that doesn't like stream or has like some kind of social media like kind of income. Like it's very few, very, very few that work a regular job that aren't like self-employed that are still esports competitors. Most of them are just incentivized to become streaming so that they can practice their game and make money at the same time.
Okay, maybe League is just a very weird esport because a lot of the pro players don't stream because they just don't have the time to stream, and they also like don't really make money off the stream. They make more of their money off of their contract to like play for the team.
Maybe that's like the way how like League team contracts work. Like they're more incentivized to practice off stream or something. I don't know, but based off of like the multiple games like I've watched, like between like WoW, Fortnite, Call of Duty, they are very much incentivized to like stream because like they all just straight up say like you're not gonna survive off of prize money. You know what I mean? Because you're like basically putting all of your bets on winning that tournament. Where it's like if you stream, you're gonna get consistent income as long as you can build a following and be somewhat entertaining. You know, and regular sports teams do that same thing for like regular athletes by providing them a platform with ads and, you know, like, oh, you can say I'm on the Patriots, I'm on the Texans, I play for Barcelona, you know, and that will just automatically grant you credibility and build you a following, and you can then just live stream, sell your own merch, do whatever the hell you want, you know. And like I said, I may not like agree that esports players are the same level of athletes as a traditional sports player, but in terms of like their viewership and like comparison, I think athletes are going to overtake traditional sports like probably pretty soon.
You said something though earlier. You said where they can sell their own merch. Yeah. That's actually something most professional athletes.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say like I might be wrong about that, depending on like selling their own merch with regular.
Yeah,
athletes.
No.
They may have to wait until they like leave that team to like sell their merch and shit, you know.
Yeah, basically they would have to leave the team, and then they would have to be like off contract with any other team because they basically have rights to your name at that point.
It depends on the contract. It's like I know with esports players, they do have more freedom. Like there's a lot of streamers like who I watch that, you know, are signed with certain teams that they still sell their own merch. And there are certain like other athletes like, you know, like UFC fighters and football players. I think I've seen a couple of football players who do sell their own merch. Yeah, Julian Edelman, who played for the Patriots, he sold his own merch. Like I know that for a fact.
When he was playing?
Yeah. While he was playing, he literally just like retired recently. So like and he's been selling merch for like several years. Same with Tom Brady too.
Was it like his own jerseys, or did he come up with his own like merchandise?
His own merchandise. Like his
no, that's different. When I'm thinking of like selling like own merch, I'm thinking of like Julian Edelman, Tom Brady jerseys, and like, you know, little trinkets for their team that's like, you know, like Patriots, Tom Brady on the back.
Oh no, it would have like their own like designs and like stuff, you know, but like it would say it would say Julian Edelman, like, or like made by like Julian Edelman's company or like whatever, you know, and you knew it was associated with him, and he promoted it on his social media and like all that stuff. Still, he wasn't able to use the Patriot logo and like all that stuff, but you know, like the fact that he's promoted on the Patriots, and you know, when like the Patriots say like, oh, this is our wide receiver, and he's tagged in it, and you click on his bio, and then in his bio there's a link to his merch. You might fucking click on his merch, you know?
Yeah, I don't think any team can really stop you from creating your own line of merchandise. As long as like non-competition laws, as long as that doesn't get involved.
Yeah. But like, yeah, basically what I'm saying, man, is I think esports, like in the future, like I don't think they're the same kind of athletes as regular athletes, like traditional athletes, because there's the physical aspect, and I just don't think they have that kind of physicality. But I do think in terms of their popularity, they're probably going to pass traditional sports, like honestly. Like I think so within our lifetime, dude. Like just like we said, like a shitty game like World of Warcraft that doesn't care about their esports, and they also only stream their esports on YouTube, by the way, too. So not on Twitch, the main streaming platform. Still pulled like 25,000 views, you know, for like just a regular day tournament, you know, for like some like qualifiers or whatever.
Yeah, but could the reason for doing that be because they don't like? I'm sure they have to sign like some form of contract to like stream on those other platforms when they're like doing like an esport or something like that. So could it be that they're only doing it on YouTube because of that?
No,
Because they just don't make enough money from it?
no, they were streaming on both for a while. Blizzard was simultaneously streaming on Twitch and YouTube for a while, and then they just decided to just sign a contract to just stream on YouTube. They were like incentivized by YouTube to like do that, but like, like even that like incentive still, with that 25,000 viewers, like was enough to make them like make that decision, So like the financials are there. And that's why also I think like in the future esports players could possibly get paid more than regular athletes because there's such low overhead with esports, that like they will have room for those bigger contracts, whereas like traditional sports you have to pay for the stadium, the construction, the jerseys, like the maintenance, health, doctors, sideline staff, like all that stuff.
It's though because they still have to pay for a facility. Like I know as like some esports teams like dropped like 50 million on like a facility recently.
I think but I think the thing is like most esports players are like just streamers and stuff though, so like I hate to say it, most of that burden kind of just falls on them, and like that's why they like get the luxury of like making their craft at home and stuff,
Yeah, but I mean, I guess getting into esports is a lot cheaper than getting into regular
Exactly,
sports.
that's what I'm saying too. They also don't have, they can live wherever they want, like if you're a New England Patriot, you got to live in New England,
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but there's also like, you don't have to travel as much.
Yeah.
Your equipment is pretty much upfront and
very minimal,
you don't really gotta maintain it.
Yeah. Well, you do have to maintain it. You gotta like replace your PC parts and stuff.
How
and
often
maintain
do you really have to update your parts like that, and how much money do you have to put in comparison to like other sports?
Yeah, and also in terms of like investing in like physical trainers and stuff too, because NFL teams and all pro sports teams, they spend a lot of money like on their trainers and stuff, whereas like traditional sports or esports, they're not going to have that overhead. That's going to fall like on the individual, because really their needs are going to be based off of like their individual needs rather than like the athletic needs, because it's like I could like be an esports player who like I'm fine with being skinny and being like lanky or whatever, and I don't want to be super jacked, so I just need to make sure my posture and like my mobility and stuff is good for like everyday life, and that's what you hire a trainer for. Whereas like you could be another esports player who wants to be a pro bodybuilder also, and that's up to you to like decide what your trainer is, so it'll fall more on the individual rather than on the team's overall cost, so like that's why like that's gonna be another reason for popularity in esports, because companies I think will be more incentivized to invest in them, because there will be more profits overall for them and probably for the players too, hopefully, as long as the esports players market themselves correctly.
There's that, and I think also another thing to consider is just societal standards of beauty as well. Just like how attractive a person is when they're like in shape and working out consistently, versus like when you're in front of a computer, you're less likely to be in shape and like be viewed as attractive because you're not in shape.
Yeah.
So I think that could also play into a factor like sponsorship and marketing, and like why people like
your brand appealability,
Yeah.
Like how you appeal to audience, how well you sell yourself, your click-through rates and all that stuff are definitely going to be like an issue with like your contract negotiations and all that stuff. But yeah, man, I just think ultimately esports is probably going to be the way of the future. Like, if I'm being honest, like, I think we could see probably traditional sports, like maybe not all traditional sports, but like at least a couple of traditional sports probably die out within like the next 100 years. And esports will be like more popular in terms of viewership.
I don't necessarily think the traditional sports will die out. But this is like kind of one thing I actually wanted to think about, is because we were like in the middle of COVID and things are kind of slowly getting back together.
Mm-hmm.
How do we feel regular sports is gonna bounce back after they're able to like get people in stadiums and things like that, like once things go back to normal?
That's a really good question. If I'm being honest, I don't really think anything is gonna go back to like normal. You know what I mean? Like the way how like society was like before, like with Like the way how we used to go to like bowling alleys and like, you know, put our fingers in like bowling balls and then go eat like chicken wings and then go suck the like hot sauce off of like those like chicken wings and
I
stuff.
don't know
like,
about you. I wasn't doing that shit.
It was a meme. It was a meme I saw, you know, like like it just made me think of that. Yeah. But it's like we used to be so like reckless with like the way how like we approached like filling stadiums and being close to each other and like personal space and all that and cleanliness that yeah, that actually might like COVID is going to have a long lasting impact on like audience attendance in traditional sports, you know?
I mean, we also had the swine flu like not too like I'm not gonna say not too long ago.
But that didn't do
like,
shit, bro. That didn't do
fucking
shit.
What do you mean? People were panicking all over the news about the swine flu.
Bro, dude, I was living in San Diego at the time when the swine flu was happening, and that was like literally prime time heat area for the swine flu because it was originating in Mexico and literally traveling through San Diego in the United States, dude. And literally no schools got shut down, nothing happened. Literally my parents didn't do fucking anything. They just said, "Oh yeah, you might get sick." Like, nobody cared, dude. There was no widespread panic or anything, man. The swine flu, the thing about, like, the coronavirus is that, like, it was ridiculously contagious. Like, it lived on metal for 14 days, lived on plastic for 9 days, and could, like, survive on wood for, like, 3 weeks or something. You know, like, it could linger for like a long time, so it was ridiculously contagious. Whereas like the swine flu, you know, like it wasn't as contagious and, you know, sneezes and all that regular stuff, you know, same with COVID, but it didn't like stick to like everything and survive nearly as long. So it wasn't like nearly as bad, and they got a vaccine for it super quick because it was so comparable to the regular flu. We did get a vaccine for this quickly too, yes, but like the impact that COVID had was not even comparable. Not even comparable to the swine flu, bro. And that's going to have a huge impact on like audience attendance like over at least the next 5 to 10 years. And that could like create the large swing in esports popularity versus traditional sports too, in my opinion.
Traditional sports overall is more profitable than esports because of the no this is why. It's because sure, they have, you know, viewership, sponsors, and all those things, but the live viewing is where a lot of money comes from. When you're actually going to the stadium, spending money on the food, buying the tickets, there's so much money to be made at the stadium. Whereas esports, a lot of people, all that viewership is coming from this computer screen where they can't charge you for your food and your ability to view it. Like even some like boxing fights, you have to pay pay-per-view to like watch the fight and things like that.
Yeah.
So traditional sports do have that advantage in that they're more profitable.
They are more profitable like in person, but the thing is I think esports are more profitable long term because companies can just sign a streamer to just take 1% of like their yearly earnings in exchange for promotion or whatever, and like that could like cover their costs and like make like them more money, you know, and like, you know, give the streamer like more promotion and increase their revenue at a much lower overhead cost. Yeah, you may not be selling them food and stuff, but instead of getting viewership the once a week or like twice a week like the sport is like, you know, like playing a game, and only for like 6 months out of that year, you're getting a streamer who works almost 300 days out of the year, you know.
Yeah, but I don't think teams make money off of the streamer streaming.
But I'm saying we're talking about. Oh, I thought we were talking about like possibly like in the future and stuff. You know, like that's what I'm saying. Like it's like the direction that esports athletes could be going. You know, when compared to like traditional sports and all that.
The thing is now with like esports, like I'm more specifically comparing this to like the league scene, just because I really understand like what's going on in the league scene. Is 3 days like that they're doing 3 days now, and that's a lot for them to handle right now. So I don't think that they're gonna up the amount of days that they like view like competition, because of the fact that like it's a lot of games for the players, and it's a lot of time and investment for the companies to like rent out the facilities, and, you know, things like that.
Yeah. But like the thing is, in terms of like overall profits, like esports, like Blizzard Entertainment and like Riot Games are easily comparable to like the NFL in terms of like in terms of like intellectual property value and like profits like generated. You know, like you can actually look at the numbers and like it's pretty comparable, like video games like to like the NFL's like standings in terms of like wealth and stuff, you know. So it's like yeah, like they may have like less like tournaments and stuff, but like I'm saying they can make more money like overall, and like we're still so early in the stages of it too, because they have such low overhead. Like is mostly what it comes down to, in my opinion. It's like with streamers and shit, it ultimately comes down to low overhead, and really you don't have to. I hate to say it, they don't have to like rent out the facilities and stuff to like host like these live events and stuff, because you can just do it on your computer, you know.
The thing is, I don't think it's fair to compare sports like basketball and football and baseball to like esports when it comes to revenue, because esports they're international generally.
Mm-hmm.
And these are like baseball, football, and basketball. These sports are only in the United States. Like, yeah, sure, you might have small leagues in the other other parts of the world. But...
Okay, these sports may be only like national in the United States, but they're viewed internationally. Like basketball,
not nearly as much,
bro. Yes, they are.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, the basketball and baseball, but football not nearly as much.
Yeah, American football, no. Like American football, yeah, you're right about that. But like basketball, baseball, tennis, like all those things. Like tennis, obviously, is an international sport, but so is basketball. Basketball is absolutely an international sport. There's the NBA, and that's just the biggest. But there is an international basketball league. You know.
Yeah, but like nobody really watches the international basketball league. A lot of people just watch the NBA because of they're the best.
They're the best of the best
in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, just because they only play in the United States, that doesn't mean it's not internationally viewed. You know, like yeah, BlizzCon only takes place in the United States, but it's still internationally viewed, and they pull athletes from all over the world.
Yeah. But
you know, same with the NBA. They pull athletes from all over the world still.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's not international. Most players are American. Most players are American, but that doesn't mean you can't not be an American and not play in the NBA.
Yeah, but my point more with that is like the popularity is like when it comes to like the NBA and like esports is like there's a lot more people playing a video game internationally than there are people like playing basketball. Like sure, it's popular in very specific like countries in the world, whereas like a video game is you're gonna find a large following for that for a lot of video games in pretty much every country.
Yeah, so like doesn't that mean that like they're gonna like be bigger like than traditional sports then?
That's the reason why I'm saying you shouldn't compare like a sport like the NBA or a sport like basketball, like in the NBA and the NFL and MLB like baseball, because their predominant like viewership is like from the United States, you know, whereas if you want to compare esports to like their viewership and finances to like sports like tennis, soccer, and I don't honestly know any other large like international sports like that, if I'm being honest, but
rugby.
Like if you rugby, yeah, if those are, if you want to compare like those sports to esports, I feel like it's a better comparison because they have such a large international following, just like esports.
The thing is though, is like other than like American football, I can say that like I can say with some confidence that those sports that are traditionally American, like especially baseball too. Baseball is very big internationally still, dude. Like baseball, baseball is actually really, a big international sport. Now that I actually think about it, because I know Japan is very into baseball too. And yeah, dude, like those sports are viewed like internationally though. So like the thing is like their viewership and their revenue does come from outside of the United States too. So that's why I think you can compare them. Like yes, American football is like 99% like Americans are watching that shit, you know. But like there is a large still number of people outside of the United States who watch the NBA and MLB, you know, and like support those like players and stuff. And even in the NFL too. Like honestly, there's a lot of European fans. That's why the NFL takes trips to Europe to like have like they have at least 4 or 5 games a year out in Europe now, like, or before COVID they did at least, you know. So it's like they are still reaching an international audience. They may not be playing internationally against like different countries and stuff, but like that's I feel like that's, you know, due to like how hard it is to actually become a pro at the sport and how many people want to, and life and shit, dude. Like, and I think esports is probably a better avenue for most people to actually build a competitive lifestyle that isn't so physically draining on their body, like, anyways, if they did want to be some kind of athlete, And that's why they would ultimately, dude, I think just esports are going to climb the ladder. Like, we're so early in the game and they're already so big that, and like in terms of revenue and like viewership and stuff, like in the next like 30 to 40 years, it's just going to be like, holy fuck. Like, honestly, I think
it's possible, but there's also, this is like another big thing I kind of just was thinking about too, is how much an influence physical activity has on mental health. Yeah. And how much better generally athletes, how much better their mental health is generally compared to people in like esports. A lot of people in esports I know like are just, their mental health is just not really well. And that could, I'm not necessarily saying because of, the video game itself and like the environment, but maybe because of the fact that they're just not being physically active.
Yeah, absolutely. Because physical activity has a large impact on mental health.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying it could also be like
link in the description
mental
for my online coaching.
But thanks for watching this week's episode of Joint Minds. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave a like, and in the comment section, let us know what you think. Are esports considered athletic, or are they just, those nerds that just don't do anything with their lives? But, if you enjoy our content, make sure to subscribe so you can see some more of it.